Hi, welcome to part 2 of our publishing and printing lecture for history of the book. Just wanted to continue from where we were looking at a lot of the changes and progression through time in Europe to looking more at the eastern continents and looking at the literature pointing to the fact that we start to see movable type being alluded to as early as the 10th century. As you may or may not know, and I think most of you do know, Gutenberg's press came in 1450 and revolutionized the whole concept of movable type and making printing that enabled mass production of materials so that more people could have access to them. But there are inferences to many Chinese inventors, and among them, one of the more fascinating ones, and again, it hasn't been uncovered or unearthed, or a dig hasn't brought it to light yet, but who knows, maybe there is some artifact somewhere that hasn't been discovered. But Pai Sheng, and pardon my mispronouncing his name, made movable type out of earthenware in the mid 10th century. There's no examples of it, but it's inferred in many documents. Also, metal movable type was experimented with in Korea in the 12th century. But because of the enormous amount of Chinese characters, setting movable type was an astronomical feat. Without a lot of the current technologies that we have available to us today. But Johannes Gutenberg, which I'll cover more in my famous library people lecture towards the end of the semester, he was credited, and I think correctly so, with a very independent invention, which was basically the predecessor to printing presses that basically didn't change for 500 years after his invention. They were improved upon, but he really did, make an incredible machine that revolutionized the world as far as being able to have access to printed materials. It was movable type. It was in Europe. He made many innovations in that printing press, and two of the biggest ones that he cast the tape based on a kind of a matrix, and that hadn't been done, and also it was hand molded. This was the start of making books less expensive and made more widely available, so it had astronomical effect on culture and society from its invention forward. So there's a lot of other very important discoveries, etc., as far as looking at printing and publishing, both in Europe and in the Eastern world. If you 8 million books is the number that they think had been printed from 1453 looking backwards. And that was on all kinds of different levels. When you look at the world and you look at, the number of continents that were actively alive culture-wise, 8 million books is pretty astronomical for the 14th century. So we're going to move a little bit forward now into the modern world. And by modern world, I'm not talking about today. I'm talking about steam-powered printing presses invention in the 1800s. This was revolutionary to the industry again. It's kind of another benchmark. Steam-powered printing presses could produce lots more sheets per hour. But the human beings that were involved in setting the type still could only do a certain number of letters per hour. And so we had a difference in humans and the ability to deal with the technology being able to handle it, but the human element not being able to. Monotype and linotype were introduced in the late 19th century. And again, here's another benchmark. They could set 6,000 letters per hour, where before it had been 2,000, and they could do an entire line of type at once when they printed it. This was absolutely incredible to the printing industry. So we're improving on Gutenberg's printing press. We're not really changing its basic design, but we're making innovations and improvements. One of the other things that's changing is that there's the censorship that you saw throughout those earlier centuries is starting to relax and not be as controlled as it was. Now, you all know your American history and European history enough to know that, and especially cultures in the East or in South America, where ideas that were against the government, it didn't make it any easier for censorship. In fact, censorship is alive and well among us today, but it was getting less restrictive. By the mid-20th century, you had Europe producing 200,000 titles a year, probably more, but that's what we have documented. So you definitely see that there's less restriction happening. It's funny, copyright issues, public domain, intellectual property, that's all 20th century concepts. So before that, it was actually the access and the technology that almost protected people's rights more so than all the laws that we have today. So we're going to just come up, we're going to come up to today just for a brief moment. Most of the books today are printed in offset lithography. It's photographically and digitally, transferable, I'm going to say type, that goes onto a metal plate and then goes through a process. But the one big difference in today that we all know about is the development of digitization of all kinds of materials, from photographs to books and other materials. The transition to digital format is still a controversy. Do you want to read a book on a Kindle? How much does making things digitized and electronically available change the access and the copyright and all kinds of other issues that we study as librarians? But it's another step in the evolution of printing and publishing. And one of the things that I think is extremely interesting is, remember way back, let's go all the way back to those clay tablets. There was a real need to make more copies. In fact, that's what people spend a lot of time looking at, is how can we make more copies? How can we speed this process up? It's expensive to make lots and lots of copies of something. However, with digitization and electronic formats, all of a sudden, we can produce fewer copies. So, to me, one of the benefits is that more people can get published. Now, if you go on the internet, you'll see all kinds of people putting their stuff up on free source. But if you read some of it, actually some of it's pretty darn good. There's electronic publishers. There's all kinds of new and innovative technologies being developed. So you come from clay tablets all the way to ebooks, and most of those big developments have happened throughout history. But if you look how far we've come just from kind of the dawn of the modern age, it is absolutely alarming. Will we see a demise to publishing as we know it? Well, I think we're going to see some changes to publishing as we know it. One of the saddest things I think is happening right now is the death of newspapers. But that may just be an evolutionary project, an evolutionary consequence. And, excuse me, sorry about that. I had to sneeze. I hate that when that happens. Times are changing, and as with everything we've seen in the history of just about anything in the world, things change. And with that, I think you're going to see publishing change dramatically over the next 5 years, probably. lots of economic things happening. People are going through getting a lot more information electronically. However, do I think that books are going to completely disappear from being printed? No. I think that there will always be a need for some level of printed material. I think it's in our essence as a human being. For some reason, there's a connection between holding a book or holding a magazine, the feel of paper. I may just because I'm a librarian to my underwear, but I really do think there's a connection between humans and the written word on paper. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk at all of you soon.